Le gars qui est derrière.
Ah oui, non,
c'est le directeur de l'IETF.
Ah, ok, ok.
C'est bien qu'il soit là.
Ah, oui, c'est très bien. Okay, so I think that we can start. So welcome to the DRIP session. Daniel?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so this is an IETF meeting. The not well apply for it. So I think that if you are not familiar with it, get yourself familiar with the all the I would say the various BCPs there. The agenda we have for today. So we have a short introduction from the chairs about the current status. Then we have a report from Stu about the current issue we have for the sum code point assignment. Then we have an implementation update from Andre, and then we go to the two working group documents. The first one about the authentication, and the second one on the registries. And then we'll have, I would say, open mic for open discussions. So for the DRIP authentication, the objective we have is to, I would say, to have an overview of the current open issues, and then to check when the document will be ready for the second working last call, and for the registries to make sure that we are ready for the DNS their review, at least in the coming weeks. Yes.
So just as Eric having the responsibility for DRIP, do we have a minute taker?
Yes, that's Stu. Stu is taking the minute. Thank you, Stu.
Thank you, Stu.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. So this is for the document status. So congratulations for the working group. We have another RFC which is published. So thanks all the authors and all the reviewers. We have also the ARCH, which is also sent to the RFC editor. Thanks you all. Thanks also for, I would say, Eric for his support and moving this forward. So unless there is any comment on the agenda, it's suggest that we proceed. So Stu.
I am now the new Stu.
Okay, so a number of things have happened in the outside world since we last gathered face to face. The first one there's a company called Onra Technologies, which is a vendor that has a UAS traffic management software product and a number of other things. They were awarded a contract by the FAA to demonstrate receiving broadcast RID and pumping it into network RID, which is exactly what we call crowdsourced RID in one of our independent drafts that we're hoping the working group will adopt. That kind of validates our belief that this is an important thing to do. Then in December, ASTM approved the terms of reference for a new work item to do device-to-device certificate-based communication security framework for unmanned aircraft systems. And they came up with a new term, A2X. You know, we're all familiar with V2V, that then got expanded to V2X, vehicle to anything. But now someone has decided that an aircraft is not a vehicle, which is a surprise to me. And in order to distinguish aircraft to other stuff communications, the new term A2X has been invented. So then in January, the first meeting of this A2X working group in ASTM kicked off. We're meeting on a weekly basis on Thursdays. And we are really carrying the flag for IETF standards that already exist, as opposed to ASTM needing to reinvent wheels. Then let's see. Also in January, ANSI published this thing that they update every 6 months. It is their gaps report on what standards do we need in uncrewed aircraft systems. Oh, by the way, that is the new term of art, uncrewed aircraft systems. And, you know, we wanted to do that, well, I don't know, 2 years ago.
Yes.
But the rest of the aviation community said, no, 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 no. The term is unmanned aircraft systems. But now they've turned around and said, no, uncrewed is a better word. So, okay.
So should we in the further document use that term right now? Or
I think we
just-
should. I think we should stick with unmanned until we complete the basic set of DRIP documents for consistency. But then once we've completed authentication and the registry's architecture, I think going forward we may wish to adopt the term uncrewed. I like it not because it is politically correct, but because it is closer to accurate, right? With an air taxi, for instance, you can have a passenger on board, so it is not unmanned. It's just the pilot isn't on board, so it's uncrewed. But even uncrewed is not completely correct, but so far no one's come up with a completely technically accurate word. Anyway, the whole ANSI thing, it's about what standards do we need that we don't have. And so Bob and I periodically contribute to the updates on that report and keep them informed of what we're doing here in IETF. Let's see. Then in February, Adam took his DRIP receiver application and field tested interoperability with somebody else's sending unit onboard aircraft. We got some remarkably long ranges that really surprised me, but the range was extremely inconsistent. It seemed to even depend upon humidity and air temperature. And then just yesterday, Bob Moskowitz presented DRIP at the first meeting of ICAO's Trust Framework Panel, and Bob is with us. So cut him some slack because he's getting no sleep because he's participating in IETF, you know, like 12 hours out of 24, and ICAO another 8 or 10 hours out of 24 in Montreal. Okay, so we still have this question about whether we need to develop some kind of a means of compliance document. That's kind of back burner at the point until we finish the basic set of DRIP documents, and hopefully they will serve. And DRIP will be demonstrated to the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration in their big UTM field test immediately after Adam and I get back from here. And there are U.S. agencies, which I won't name, who are rushing forward to at least field trial, if not deploy DRIP, even though the ink is not dry on our standards documents. But you'll notice that I keep saying the U.S. this and the U.S. that. We really need more participation from outside the U.S. Here within the DRIP working group. Matt, if you would advance the slide, please. So how does all this external stuff drive what we're doing? Well, initially, ASTM's fundamental document 3411, plus the rules as we understood them from various civil aviation agencies around the world, drove our requirements, which drove our architecture, which is now in the editor queue, and drove our definition of our entity tag, which has been published. The authentication documents in working group last call, and I guess it's going to need a second working group last call because it's had to have some changes. The registry's documents are at this point still all Adam. They're not DRIP working group. And would say no? The architecture has been adopted, but the individual technologies for implementing it have not. And then floating out here on the right are what I'll call the second round of DRIP. Everything that's in black and green and yellow is what we need to just do unmanned aircraft system remote identification in a trustworthy manner. Whereas these things in red are how to then use unmanned aircraft system identification information to do useful things. So please urgently review auth and help with the other stuff. Okay, so ICAO still wants an observer from IETF. And we haven't come up with one yet. So if anybody wants to step up and kind of represent IETF to ICAO's Trust Framework Panel, it would be great if we had somebody. Also, ASTM wants ICAO to act as a registrar for the RID specific session ID types and specific authentication methods. Now, we're already covered on the session ID types because it was baked right into the standard. But on the SAM codes, we need them. We need at least 3. And there's a process that's laid out in F3411 for getting them, but that process hasn't been stood up with an actual registrar. The good news, although it is unofficial good news from Bob like 2 hours ago or so, is that he talked with a key guy there at ICAO in Montreal, and we're we are to expect to see movement from them within a matter of days. I'm hoping days isn't 364 days, but we shall see. In case it proves to be more days than we can continue to accommodate, because this has held up the drip train for many, many months, causing some embarrassment. We've also been talking with IANA about could they backfill here? You know, we've got a lot of confidence that IANA knows how to do this. There are some non-technical sensitivities in ICAO and ASTM and so on that have driven maybe doing it a different way. But anyway, the IP prefix for the initial RID application has been settled in a published RFC. That essentially, with help from Jim Reed, settled the DNS Apex question. And IANA has unofficially agreed to be the RID type registrar if ASTM asks them to do so, because ICAO can't move quickly enough. So I have ghostwritten a letter, which is currently being reviewed by some of the folks here in the room. And if it's okay here, and if ICAO doesn't move within another week, I will pass that to the powers that be in ASTM. And that's all I have, unless there are any questions on these externalities.
Thank you, Stu.
Oh, I see Jim going to the mic.
Hi, Stu. Jim Reed. It's a question on this issue of the observer from the IETF.
Yes.
You mentioned about representing the IETF. Is this
Right.
actually to represent the IETF as a body, or is it just to represent what the IETF is doing in this space? I'm not quite sure what the role is and what sort of commitment that's going to take. Is it physical attendance at ICAO meetings or participating in conference calls? What does that observer role actually entail, and what does it mean? What do you mean by representing the IETF?
Right. So ICAO has stood up this trust framework panel for the entire aviation ecosystem, not just uncrewed aircraft systems, manned aircraft, airline reservation ticket counters, the whole 9 yards, right? And so they want an expert from IETF in broad issues of trust in networking. So it's
Right.
not just DRIP. And this would have to be appointed by IAB, but IAB is going to need, you know, a volunteer to consider appointing.
Okay. I think our esteemed area director is maybe going to give some more insights on that.
Yeah, so Bob, if you don't mind, I will jump forward on this one. So nobody speaks for the IETF, right, except all of us together, so that's a given. The IAB role is basically IAB is in charge of all the liaison.
Mhm.
So that could be a liaison, just to be clear. So nobody can engage the IETF, right? Not even a past chair.
Right, yeah, so from a nomenclature standpoint, what we would call this person is a liaison. And what the ICAO will call them is an observer, because they will be a non-voting member, but expected to be a subject matter expert who can contribute to the discussions. Thanks all.
Yeah, but there's a comment from Bob.
Okay, there we go. This came up today's meeting. We had a presentation about post-quantum computing and its impact on the PKI for aviation and the problems with that. So discussion of the IETF's activities in post-quantum computing came up in the discussion. Input from IETF on what they're doing for post-quantum computing would be of serious interest to this body, for one thing. There is also discussions in terms of trust in networking. So there's going to be routing issues and other things which have come up. So this is broader in participation of the IETF work, which hits on this large trust framework that ICAO is developing for all of aviation. That's for the stuff up in the air and the supporting stuff on the ground. And the people. We had a presentation which was done on the electronic passport process, which has been using LDAP for the past 15 years, but is now looking at moving off of LDAP as a back-end directory for electronic passports. And then electronic pilot license discussions got pulled into that as well. And trust in terms of of a software representative of things that a pilot could have on their iPad or phone for their electronic pilot license. So there's much broader discussions in the trust framework related to activities which we have been working hard at for many, many years, decades, that we'll have direct representation and advice to ICAO, because remember, they're looking at 30-year time frame. Anything they set out to do today, they'll be piloting maybe in 5 years, and then when they stand it up, just like the electronic passport, they can expect it to run for 15 years before they start talking about what we do next. So
Thank
that
you. Thank you.
long-term
Thank you.
view they need from us.
Thank you, Bob, for sharing all of this information.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Stu, for presenting this update. We will move to the next presentation from Andre. Andre, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me well? Yes, okay. So next slide, please. So we have developed in Linköping University this open source system to implement various parts of DRIPs, which was already presented in the last meeting. So we have unmanned aircraft broadcasting things over Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 4, Bluetooth 5. We have Observer, which is using Android application to pick up the signals, as well as a registration interface and a kind of flight recorder using Iroha blockchain at the moment. Next slide. So our Android application is based on Open Drone ID, and it's backward compatible, so it also picks up in secure drone broadcasts. It has been published on Google Play Store for a few months now, so you can download using this link, and currently there are some tens but not thousands download yet. And we need more users to try it because it doesn't show up currently in the public search, so you need to use this link, and we prefer to be more easily accessible, so please try it out. Next. And the biggest progress we had lately was with actually using Bluetooth 5, because the previous hardware was quite raw, but using this USB BT 500 plug into the Raspberry Pi, we actually able to use it in our testbed, as well as on the right side you see this black box. It's called New Unit of Computing, x86 architecture, and it also has built-in Bluetooth 5, so it works fine with our software and increases the ranges up to 1-2 kilometers for detection compared to Bluetooth 4. Next, please. Another major result from last event was this big study on how to implement DRIP registry using a combination of interplanetary file system and hyperledger Iroha. So it's not currently directly following the group proposal, but at least I shared the document already with Adam, and I think he reviewed it and might get some good ideas how to use it in the upcoming specs. Has been already presented publicly, but it's not yet published. It will be a PDF on this web page eventually, but it's like a working prototype. So we use these smart contracts to actually ensure that there is compliance, for example, with GDPR, so that data can be also added and removed to this registry and so on. Next. This is our primary experimental platform on Matrix 300 drone. As you see, there is this new unit of computing sitting on it with 5G modem, and it's like integrated to the drone's sensors and battery. So it's quite easy to experiment because it's x86 architecture. So it's easy to run our code more or less directly there, and we are currently testing Bluetooth 5 primarily in these approaches, maybe some kind of crowdsourced ID in the future. Next. Also, we have started with formal verification of DRIP protocol, and we found, for example, some possibility of replay attacks. So we are still revising this study, and maybe we need to in future provide a patch to provide more freshness in our protocol messages so that it's not subjective to this kind of attacks. But I think in IETF, in some protocols like TLS-1.3, formal verification was quite successful and used a lot. So hopefully we'll have help DRIP to progress in the future. Next. And we are having this twice a year, this big event where we can test drones flying in a certain big area. And for example, this May we are planning to have another session where we focus on Bluetooth 5 performance, because before it was some problem with hardware using that. And we hope to also confirm like maximum ranges depending like on temperature, weather, and so on. It's quite interesting to measure, as well as integrate this Bluetooth and another broadcast to the common platform that shows all these devices. It's also drone boats, commercial aircraft, drones, everything should be like on a single platform. Next. So basically that's it. That's our group flying the drones in the backyard. And there are more backup slides later with some links to our Git software and also some other details that were presented before. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Russ?
Hi, Russ Housley. Can you back up to the Cameron slide? So you found a problem with injective agreement. You didn't have enough freshness, I think you said. How is this being fixed?
Well, so far we are improving this Altamarine model, and also we are looking at potential things with protocol, but since in a way we are kind of broadcasting HIT and we are not maybe having even like timestamp or anything in the message, it might be a bit hard to fix, let's say, but we are studying.
Okay, so I'm unclear whether you think you found a problem in the protocol or you think you found a problem in the model of the protocol.
Well, it's, as you know, it's a interactive process, but there might be some.
So you don't know yet either, is that what you mean?
I can forward you a paper so that you check the details.
It depends.
I'm just not sure what the working group's supposed to do with what you've reported.
Well, currently the protocol is already published at Surface, so maybe best we can do is to think of an errata or some kind of future version in the standard project.
Right. Well, we've seen updates to other protocols when flaws have been found. And so if you found a flaw, we ought to fix it.
Yeah, fully agree. I remember that we had this discussion last time. So, and we said that we need to identify, I would say, when you presented a similar, I would say, results, that if there are fixes or any modification to be done in the existing documents or even the one that are published, that will be, I would say, something which is really important for the working group to consider and to pursue it. For the HIP stuff, this is all out of scope of the working group, so it is not. We won't do that in this working group, but we will figure out with Eric where to progress them if this is related to HIP itself. So thank you again, Andre, for sharing all of this, and we can move to the next slide.
Because I will. All right, so I'm going to get into the meat of the group of what we're doing here. So about authentication and the registry's documents, which are now on -30 and -8. So as Stu mentioned, the ASTM-ICAO relationship is still in a to be determined state, but we have two plans to move forward. One is an unstick via IANA, where we would backfill into ASTM, offering to ASTM that IANA is willing to do the work, and setting up an MOU and all that good stuff to get that unstuck. That's if ASTM wants to do it that way. Otherwise, if they continue to want to spin on ICAO, which is hopefully only a few days away, not 364, we could pull from the experimental private use section of the code point but that would mark our document as experimental. And we'd have to go back and BIS it later when an actual registrar shows up and we actually have to do allocations of the code points. So option 2 is absolute last resort. We don't want to do it if at all possible. So that's where we are on this. And I think Stu gave us a good update on where we are on that front. Next slide. So authentication went through some cleanup, mostly some back and forth because of the experimental stuff. I started putting it in, I got to pull it back out. So text was cleaned up in some various places. Some field orderings were changed in the wrappers due to matching some endorsement stuff that was in the registries document, as we have been learning slowly. And one big thing that has happened is that there were very hard references in registries in the authentication document. The document for auth as a whole now is much more standalone, which I'm much more comfortable with, and I think the chairs are as well. So we can get it through IESG's kind of its own thing, and registries will reference it as a back reference to basically like, you need to provide that format that is only used in authentication. So if you want to see anything on the latest for authentication, there's an ATW branch on GitHub. It was not merged in because I literally merged it in at 2 a.m. last night, Japanese time, or pushed it. So, but their -30 is on the data tracker. Next slide, please. So we're going to get into some registry stuff. So with registries, a new section was added to the document in the introduction section, section 2.1, which is supported scenarios. And it effectively lays out the 4 scenarios in registrations that we want to support. The first and most obvious one is for debts, because it's a document about debts. We want to be able to register them and look them up. So of course, that is why we're making the document. The other 3 are all around serial numbers for unmanned aircraft systems and putting them in DNS and getting lookups through them. And there are 3 different ways this happens, either bare, linked, or generated. And I'll get into a little bit of what each one of those is on the next slide. So with serial numbers, for those who are unfamiliar, it's actually a standard, ANSI CTA 2063-A. It's free. You can go and download it. It's a 20-character max with 4 characters being assigned to a manufacturer, 1 character being the length, and that's a hexadecimal character, and then up to 15 characters being an identifier. It's a 34-character set, as shown on the slide, and the manufacturer code is assigned by ICAO. You basically just email ICAO, say I am a UAS manufacturer, give some proof, and then they will give you a 4-character code from the space. And then you get to do whatever you want with the 15 characters after it. That is the bare way that the serial numbers work. The other one is, no, you can, yeah, go back one. No, go back one, Med. Sorry. So go forward one. There we go. The second way this works is what I'm referring to as a DRIP serial number that's linked. Basically, in DNS, we point a ANSI CTA bare number to a debt. And this could be done by a manufacturer or a USS. And the final way, which is actually done in RFC 9374, it's in section 4.2, is taking a debt or an HI and encoding it into the serial number format. So they are linked together or encoded in a translation of each other. It's a slightly different character set. We remove 2 characters, and everything is defined in 9374 to do that. And when you do this, obviously DNS things apply because there's a debt in DNS. So let's go on to the next slide. So the big thing that before this meeting was apexes. What were we going to do? And I sat with Jim for about 2.5 hours Saturday. We've been talking back and forth for a number of weeks through email, and we have agreed on these 2 apexes. First off, IP6.ARPA is the required home for any resource record that is associated with a debt, because a debt is a hierarchical hit, and a hierarchical hit is an IPv6 address. and you nibble reverse it and you put it in IP6.ARPA. Done. And the document very clearly at the moment, I think I said it as a must never come up with any other FQDN mechanism for a debt and put it in DNS in any other apex. This can be changed. I will solicit working group input on this, but that was the start I started at. And me and Jim were comfortable starting there and then softening it as we moved forward. The second apex is for serial numbers. And this one is a little bit more complicated because it would make sense to put it in .ARPA. It's infrastructure in a sense. We're basically doing an infrastructure lookup of a name to get some information. So ARPA kind of makes sense where it goes, but what is the subdomains? Who owns those subdomains? We believe ICAO should own those subdomains because they're the ones that have the root of the manufacturer identity for that serial number. So we are proposing sn.uas.icao.arpa be the apex for serial numbers in DNS, and there would be basically a reversed format that would go there where lookups can be made just like DETs would. Obviously, other subdomains of uas.icao.arpa could be made because ICAO would own that domain space, but we don't specify anything. It's all out of scope of this document. But in the diagram you see here, you can see all of the different not serial number, but UAS identity types that exist, and the ones that we are clearly saying are out of scope and one that is in scope. And I am willing to take the interrupt from Russ if he wants to come forward, because I want feedback. This is me and Jim putting a stake in the ground and maybe hammering it in about 2 feet.
Have you done any coordination with the IAB on this?
No,
They own .ARPA.
there's been nothing done. Jim, if you want to say something on that front.
Russ, there's been no formal discussion with the IAB about this.
I figured informal first.
Okay, thanks, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We have had some casual conversations, but not to the point of saying this is what the second level name should be, but it's just more to agree the principle that there should be some subdomain under .ARPA for this group. Sorry, talking to the mic. Well, okay, thank you, Russ. That makes it easier. Yeah, we have had some informal conversations just to sort of confirm that putting this under something .ARPA would be the right thing to do. But the mechanism for deciding what that something should be and how we make the IAB do whatever needs to be done has still not taken place.
Yeah, Kim, please.
Go ahead.
Just to add to that, Kim Davies, Diana, all the allocations under .ARPA are purpose-based, not to entities. So it's probably more of a nomenclature issue. And I think the thrust of what you're trying to accomplish is on point, but the actual
the naming is completely just to have something to point at, for everyone to point at and go, this is kind of what we're thinking. If the words change, I don't particularly care. And you say something that it was in the draft and I have removed it from the draft, which is controversial, so I will say it rather carefully. If another HIT prefix is allocated for, say, IoT, there could be the precedent that IoT.ARPA exists, much like UAS.ARPA exists. That is a thing that I have contemplated. I wrote down and then I removed because it's controversial in some ways. But as you say, it's a purpose, right? UAS is one purpose. IoT is another purpose. How much do we want to deal with this? And also on all of this, we're talking about ICAO, because ICAO is the one organization that pops in my head that would want to own and have authority on this, right? This turns into we need to interact with these organizations and get them to agree on it as well. And what do they want it to name, be like? What do they want that to look like? How they want that relationship to work? No idea yet, but we should start opening the floor and discussion to that. I'll do Jim first, I think. Yeah, Jim.
Okay, thanks, Jim Reid. The issue here, we're trying to deal with this stuff in the relationship with ICAO, has lots of similarities with what we had to do with ENUM in the DNS 20 years ago. Now, things are slightly different in terms of the implementation detail, but it's still, broadly speaking, the same fundamental principle, which is an international treaty organization, in this case ICAO, has oversight or control of this number space for the serial numbers. So they have to have administrative control or effective administrative control over how that is going to be expressed in the DNS. In the ENUM case, which is to do with telephone numbers, the ITU had effective administrative control, but other people take care of the technical details underneath about how the DNS was organized for that. So one of the conversations that we will probably have to have fairly soon is with ICAO is how they would foresee any kind of DNS infrastructure for these apexes being organized and arranged. And there are probably going to be things that they have to do about fitting a numbering and a naming scheme for that, which will probably just be a cut and paste from the existing documents, I would imagine. But the fundamental principle there is that we, as either the IETF or the IB, don't want to get into those discussions. This is something that just strictly is ICAO's responsibility. There's sole control over it, although technical control might go to some other party that's blessed by ICAO to do the stuff.
And I will add to that, because I see Bob's in the queue and I'm going to let him go. But I will say before that is that ICAO already has an MOU with IANA, we believe, in some sense. And there has been rumblings of other domains and other things that they want. And this has zero to do with any of that. Anything that's coming out of the TFP from ICAO, this has nothing to do with it. This is a completely new relationship between IETF and ICAO for this specifically. It might get rolled into the TFP stuff, but at the moment it is not. So they're two very clearly different worlds. Bob?
We had the discussion about the ICAO.ARPA or whatever it is, .ARPA, back in London with a number of members of IAB. These were informal discussions, and there was at that time stated interest in being able to pursue this. So we need to restart those discussions now that we have revved registries and get this on a more formal basis. But Jim and I and you, Adam, spoke with Wes and others about this subject. So this will not be the first time of bringing it up, but we now need to restart those discussions with IB, just as Russ indicated.
Right. All right. So next slide. So out of the discussions I've had in the past week with Jim, we have come to the realization that we might want to actually create a new resource record type. Originally in the documentation or in the document, there were 3 resource records we were using: the HIP resource record, a CERT resource record, and a NAPTR resource record. And as we continued down the road of talking about this, Jim asked the logical question of, it's not hard to make a new resource record type. Why don't we just do that? And I said, why wouldn't we? Because it's one record lookup. It's defined in the spec what you need to look up. You just go, instead of having multiple lookups into DNS, putting burden on the DNS, constant queries. So to the working group, one, is this something we want to do? I think it would definitely benefit the architecture for registries and the DNS. And 2, what is in it? For the moment, I have basically done a superset of the HIP resource record, adding stuff for HIP. But is there anything I'm missing or anything we want to add or remove from the HIP resource record? I have informally talked to Karsten about could this be put into CBOR? And he's like, there's nothing wrong with making it CBOR. So we might actually format it as CBOR. I hear a laugh in the back. So that's an option that we can pursue. And this also removes a big question I had on endorsements, in that they were originally going to be put in the cert resource record, and we were using an OID and OID, and we'd have to get an OID class, and that's all gone now. It's just part of the new resource record type. And I will let the floor open.
Yeah, Thomas Eckert. You may want to consult with DNS people about the agility of
Absolutely.
of DNS servers being deployed in the context where you need them. I think new record types should be much more agile now to be added, but depending on which environments you work with, that may not be true. So the alternative is to use text record, right? And then the question is whether the encoding. Yeah, well, I mean, if you don't like them, that's fine, right? I just wanted to say, right? If you have trouble to get the new resource records deployed in time for what you need, right? Even if it's just a workaround.
Right. Thank you.
Jim Reed here. If you want to really annoy a DNS person, say chuck it in a text record. If you really want to annoy a DNS person, say chuck it into a text record. They just don't like it. As far as the agility concerns you mentioned, this is a no-brainer. There's a lightweight process for getting URR types. You essentially fill in a template, it goes for an expert review, and that can typically be turned around in a couple of weeks. I think that's more than agile enough. The other concern you then have is how is that going to be supported in authoritative and recursive servers? And again, that's a no-brainer, because there's already an RSA standard which says how to deal with unknown RR types. So this has been deployed for a long, long time. Most of the code that's out there on the internet already supports this. So therefore, if the new RR type is not known, they will know how to handle it. And then we're talking here about a closed system, which is essentially to do with DRIP identifiers. So you can pretty much guarantee that any of the entities that are doing these DNS lookups inside this DRIP space are going to understand about this new RR type, if that's the path we're going to go down. And just another clarification about this new RR type. What Adam and myself are thinking about here is that when you're looking up the dotted decimal, the nibble reversed IPv6 address under IP6.APA, you're not going to look for a PTR record as you would do for a conventional IPv6 address. You're going to be looking for this new RR type.
Yes. Eric?
So, Eric Vink here. I wouldn't mind if everyone is doing like me, putting themselves in the queue first before talking, right? Small thing. More important, when you have a draft, a version which you think it's stable, please ask to the DNS directorate, Mohammed and Daniel request the DNS directorate review of it.
Yeah, we're definitely at the end of this. Yeah. So next slide, I believe. So endorsements went through a little small update change. The CDDL was broken because I didn't know how to write CDDL. I now know how to write CDDL because I found a tool that let me actually test it. So that's fixed. And I pared down some of the appendix sections because it was really bloated and a lot of them weren't being used. So that's been done. A question was raised amongst myself and Stu to make sure that we align ourselves with other work that's doing similar stuff, i.e. RATS and X509. We want to make sure that this kind of aligns. It would be nice. So in terminologies and structures, etc. Now, the last point is a contentious one. I don't know if it belongs in the architecture document for registries. It's the place where it's landed over the past 2 years. I'm re-raising the question if it's a separate document. It doesn't need to be, potentially, but I'm re-raising it to the working group just in case. Eric, is that you again for this, or is that from before?
Yeah, I know. Can you repeat just what you said?
I'm asking the working group if the section about endorsements in the DRIP registry's architecture document benefits being a separate document and not part of it. I see pros and cons, obviously, but I'm not quite sure. And it's been asked a couple of times. I'm asking the working group again. I don't know how we feel about that because it's another document in the queue that would then have to be aligned, and I don't know how we feel about that as a group. So that was where that question's coming from. It doesn't need to be answered now. I'd like to know in like 2 weeks. That would be nice, but so that's where that question's coming from. Do you have anything to say? Okay.
Yeah, I think for this one we have to wait until we have a mergeable version of the other contents of the document.
It's
See if there's an imbalance between the
That's fair.
informative part and standard. For example, if you will define the introduce the newer type, I don't know, Jim, do we need a standard track for defining one, or just expert review will be sufficient for it? Okay, so yeah, okay, yeah, but okay, so let's wait so that you have I would say, a more stable version of the contents, and
That's
then we can
reasonable.
get there. Yeah.
At least it's been raised and potentially useful. Do I want to, Bob?
Yeah, Bob, please.
Bob.
I was taken to serious questions yesterday at ICAO about the alignment of our endorsements with the ICAO's trust framework for their PKI, and so such that we fit very well into their certificate policy. This is really, in many regards, a no-brainer that some registries will want to be a serious part of that PKI with X509. So I literally be pulling text out of the certificate policy that ICAO has and putting it into this draft for covering that. But there is expectation on ICAO's part that if what we're doing are these endorsements, they're so like X509, we really want to fit within the ICAO governance model for the endorsers. So that's an oversight on and auditing of the process of the endorsers, following what is typically done in a certificate policy. I don't think it's hard, big stretch to do, as I'll literally be taking the text out of the certificate policy, slide it into here.
Yeah. Okay, good.
That's it.
Okay.
Thanks, Adam. Jim Reed again. Could you please scroll back to the slide on the domain names that you presented? I think it's 2 slides back.
That one?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
There's something else we need to think about, but it's primarily, I think, going to be an issue for ICAO, is that we're going to be putting identifiers for these devices in the domain name tree. And that will probably end up being a matter of national law and national regulation, not necessarily something that ICAO can decree for everybody. So we probably need to have a conversation with ICAO about how to do some kind of administrative delegation, maybe some technical delegation underneath these prefixes, so that, for example, the debts that are issued for devices that are used in the United States are under some kind of authorization control of the FAA or for the other respective national aviation authorities to comply with the local laws about data protection and privacy and all these other things that might come into play. So we'll need to think a little bit about that, but we need to have a conversation with the ICAO if they think this is the right idea about what they would want to do. And if I can go back to the example I was talking before about ENUM, one of the reasons for using an international treaty organization for that is that they know the appropriate contacts in each respective country. The IETF doesn't.
That's a fair point.
Right. And if that was to happen with ICAO, you can almost guarantee that the outputs of the TFP, the Trusted Framework Panel, is what's governing and driving this with the X509s and all that stuff. So we recollide again. You can go forward back to, well, forward, another one. Yeah, okay. So this is next steps and timelines, at least in how I'm seeing it. So first off is cleaning up section 6. This is about the differential access stuff, i.e. RDAP, or not that, it was section 6 is the various different use case processes. So I got to clean up that because of the endorsement changes and the DNS changes. So that's a work item that I'm working slowly through. I'm stepping through each one very carefully. Section 7 is about the differential access stuff. It makes more sense to be after the DNS section, so there'll just be a section reorder because that's where it is, and it needs to be reviewed and wordsmithed. A lot of what Jim just said about, national delegation from ICAO, that is where that kind of fits in. So that's very much where that will be. Obviously, the resource record type development and allocation, there might be a separate draft associated with that as a common courtesy after the expert review with the form. Jim said he would start the process and work our way through it. We just need the working group to consent on some things that are in it. Breaking out of the endorsements, I'm going to agree with Med. We give us some time to get the draft a little bit more mature and then go from there to see if it's jiving correctly. And if it isn't, then maybe pull it out. If not, we leave it in and it's fine. The next piece is the X509 stuff. And this is something that this is a 2 a.m. Adam musing. So take it with a grain of salt. The X509 work that Bob is doing in the TFP for ICAO is being backported into this document, but we don't know the timeline for that. Should this X509 stuff be pulled out into its own document? If we're doing it for the endorsements, why would we put X509 in there? So that is more of a alignment thing that, why would we pull endorsements out and leave X509 in? I think it would make it a lot more agile for Bob, right? Bob is doing stuff with X509 and TFP. He's backporting it into IETF as needed. Having a separate draft to do that unsticks us because we don't want to be in another sticky situation with ICAO, with the TFP, waiting on X509 stuff to try to publish this document. I don't want to go there. So anything to avoid such a hurdle, I think is good. But I will leave that to the working group to decide. And then finally, some IANA registries for various items. It's really just keys for data models and CDDL. So I need to work my way through that. I would like to have something for working group last call, probably by 118, and then within a couple of weeks, hopefully before 117, we'll get this document squared away, me and Jim, that we could throw it to the DNS directorate to get an early review on it. That is everything with registries. I open the floor for someone to throw tomatoes at me. Or tell me I'm crazy, which I am.
Yes, do please.
Oh, I just said I was crazy.
You are crazy.
Thank you.
I just want to draw some parallels. Just as in a hybrid crypto system, we frequently use asymmetric crypto for certain things and symmetric crypto for other things. And there was, Bob mentioned post-quantum concerns up at ICAO. I also slipped into one of the DRIP documents discussion about how we might want to use quantum resistant long heavyweight keys for long-term keys that are going to get reused many times as kind of roots for short-term session keys that can fit into these small packets. And this also goes to the whole idea of X509 certificates versus our own bespoke DRIP endorsements, right? I think these are all parallel concepts that we're not suggesting that we're going to try to jam X509 certs out over broadcast grid. That would never work. If it would have worked, we would have never come up with our own bespoke endorsement format, right? But we may need to graft our subtree of these compact endorsements onto a larger ICAO Trust Framework panel tree that is all X509. So that's really what we're talking about with regard to the harmonization, and similarly with RATs, right? At some point, people are going to want to know not only whose aircraft is that, but they're going to want to know some attributes of the aircraft or the computing system on board the aircraft or the computing system that's being used as a ground controller or whatever.
And so we were trying to figure out, all right, well, how does that plug into this? So there's a number of things that we've talked about that may have seemed very, very disconnected, but that's kind of the idea.
Thank you, Stu.
We weave the story. I open the floor to anything that anyone wants to say or comment, suggestions, anything.
Yeah,
Please read the auth draft. Please read the registry draft, even in its current state. It's a constant work in progress, especially the registries. Reviews are more than welcome.
Yeah.
I will get back to you within a couple of days.
Yeah, just one, I would say, one comment on the proposed timeline.
Yes.
So if I understand, you suggest that we wait for the DNS, the review till we are close to the working of last calls.
Yeah, that was me too. I didn't think about the DNS DIR review. That is definitely the next thing that needs to happen. We can confer with Jim offline if the version that I pushed is enough to do it. I said offline, but sure.
Yes, it's better to discuss it now.
Yeah, let's use the mic time.
Okay, I'm using my DNS DIR co-chair hat. You
Hello.
you can send an ID to us at any time, and we'll take a look at it. And in fact, we get lots of documents that are sent to the director have got no DNS content at all. So you don't have to wait till last call. And the rationale for having this directorate is to get early reviews of documents so that any mistakes or errors in the DNS related content get fixed before something inside the document comes very close to a final standard. And if anything is found wrong in the DNS text that I've written, then there's a big problem.
It's very good text.
Okay, so you agree that if we can send the current version we have so far?
I'm happy sending -08 to the DNS DIR tomorrow and letting them.
Yeah, so if I understand well, the new R-type idea is not yet in this version.
It is not, no.
Yeah, what I would really suggest is that you just modify the document to just record the rationale. That means that the proposal that you had and the recommendation to go to the R-type without documenting the R-type, and that just leave that recommendation so that the reviewer can comment on that part.
If that's what you want, it's okay. Then it is there in there.
It's
I just call it a hit resource record type. That's all it is, and I remove all references to other resource record types in the document. So but it's not explicitly. This says we need to create a new one. We're going to call it potentially hit. It will have stuff in it.
Yeah, the name is not that important, but the recommendation to create a new one, it's really one which I would say instrumental for the rest of the work. So making that more visible in the document.
I can make a note. I can make a note and push up a -9 that just says, note, hit resource record type is a new resource record type that DRIP working group is proposing to create for said stuff.
Okay, so once that version is out, we will send this document, this version to the DNS the review. This is not a challenge, I would say, what you have mentioned, Jim, but it is better to have more eyes. So that's really for the sanity checks. So we'll do that. We will also organize some interim meetings for this purpose so that we can progress and not wait for the next IETF for this.
Yeah, that is
the announcement will.
I would want interims.
Okay.
I want interims for this, definitely. Yeah. So.
Daniel, do you have any further comments to share with with Adam and the team?
No, that's fine.
Eric?
He's happy.
Anyone in the room?
Reviews.
Okay, so if there is no further comment, I think that we can adjourn here. Thank you for all the work you are doing.
You will literally have the new -9 in the next 20 minutes.
Okay, that's great.
Because I will literally pull out my laptop right now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.